Hi everyone, welcome to week 5. This week we'll be talking about stereotypes, microaggressions, as well as white privilege. To begin today, I just want to remind you what will we do. As usual, you'll have your discussion board post will be due Thursday, your initial post, and then your minimum of 2 follow-up response posts will be due Sunday by 11:59 p.m. and then your week 5 quiz will be due as well. Looking into next week, week 6, your cultural plunge will be due. You will turn that in via Blackboard discussion board. It'll be your post for the week. So if you have not yet, we strongly encourage you to attend the event, organization, festival, whatever it may be, where you're going into a cultural or experience that is not the norm for you. If you have any questions regarding what would be appropriate, please don't hesitate to email either Dr. Owens or myself. We're happy to help you. So let's get into this week's discussion. And it's just a brief overview of our many readings and different definitions and so forth. So let's start off by the categorizations of race and ethnicity. So there's 4 different categorizations, the first being stereotype, and this is a generalization that's about a group or its members based upon their categorization. It can be positive or negative. And then there's prejudice. And this is a negative judgment about a group or its members based upon their categorization. And these are both stereotypes and discrimination prejudice are internal, whereas discrimination and racism are external, meaning these are both seen in one's behaviors towards another group or its members. So let's talk a little bit or go a little bit further into stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is a fear that one will confirm the negative stereotype of a group to which one belongs in an area in which the individual excels. So an example might be, let's say I am an accountant and I love my degree in accounting. I love being an accountant. I really pride myself at being strong in math. So there's 4 different elements that are needed to trigger a stereotype threat. The first one being that an individual has to excel in an area that is contrary to the stereotype. So the stereotype for many women is that women are not strong in math. And then this is fictitious, but imagining that I was really strong in math and had a lucrative and respected, esteemed career in accounting. All right, so then the stereotype has to be negative, and the stereotype being that women are not strong in math. Right? And then the area in which the individual excels has to be important to the person. So I have to really pride myself in the fact that I'm a great accountant, that I'm strong in math, and that I work very hard in math. And then last but not least, the test of the individual skill must be challenging. And so my career as an accountant must be challenging. It has to be something where I'm always having to work hard. So maybe this comes out in a meeting with other accountants who happen to also be strong at math, but they're men. And so, right, and we're all in this challenging experience together. And I might feel stereotype threat because I want to prove myself as a very strong accountant and a woman who's good at math. However, there is the negative stereotype that exists, and that I am contrary to that stereotype. So then moving on into Ridley's categorizations of racism, there's 3 different categories. The first one being overt racism. And this is discriminatory behavior in which those in the majority engage in open, hostile acts of aggression against racial minorities consciously and unapologetically. So if you think of the KKK or white supremacist groups, these are examples of overt racism. Covert intentional racism is discriminatory behavior that is intentional but is covered up so that one can deny his or her racism. And so this might be an example of someone flying a Confederate flag, and they try to hide their racism or deny their racism by saying that they really appreciate the history of the South and they want to honor that history. The last category of racism is covert unintentional racism. And this is discriminatory behavior that is unintentional but serves to perpetuate ongoing racist acts or traditions. So let's look at this next diagram, and it gives different examples of both overt racism as well as covert racism, or we could see it as overt white supremacy and covert white supremacy. And you'll see that covert white supremacy or racism is much more socially acceptable here in the United States, at least. And so you can look at some of these different examples. So then let's talk about colorblind racial ideology, or CBRI, if we like to use acronyms. And this is an attempt to pretend that race and racism will not exist if people ignore race or ethnicity. This ideology has two components. It's color evasion and power evasion. And so this can be portrayed in comments such as, when I look at you, I don't see race. There's only one race, the human race. Why do we have to talk about race? These types of comments demonstrate that an individual has a colorblind racial ideology. And the message to individuals of color is that they should assimilate to the dominant culture. It also, when an individual makes a comment like this or has a colorblind ideology, the individual is denying the significance of another person's racial or ethnic experience and history, as well as denying the person as a racial and cultural human being. And so we might see someone's colorblind statements also as microaggressions. And racial microaggressions are a small slight or offense that may be intentional, but is mostly unintentional and does not harm the target of the offenses in any major way, but can accumulate to be burdensome over time. And so when an individual it behaves in a way or says something that is a microaggression, it leaves the person or the target of the comment or the behavior wondering if it was intentional, if it was not intentional, and wondering over time does it add up enough to be racist. And so it leaves the person really having to think about race and their experience, and might also put up a wall in trust. And so we also see microassaults, and these are blatant verbal, nonverbal, or environmental attack, intentionally discriminatory or biased. And so this would be an example of someone having swastikas in their home, and then they have people who are of color over to their home, or they have Jewish individuals come to their home, right, and they still have the swastikas visible in their home. This is also could be a microassault, would be one preventing his or her or their child from dating outside of their race. So those are just some examples. Micro insults are an intentional behavior or verbal comment conveying rudeness. Unintentional behavior or verbal comment conveying rudeness or insensitivity. And so this can be portrayed in asking a coworker how they got their position. It also could be a person of color who's attending a professional conference and who is a professional themselves, and then they're mistaken to being a service worker or working for the hotel, as an example. A micro-invalidation is an action that excludes, negates, or dismisses the perceptions of the target person. And so an example would be asking someone where they were born, or asking someone where they're from, as if they're an outsider in their own land or their own home. So then, if an individual or a person of color were to confront an individual about the microaggression or the cumulative microaggressions, sometimes what we also see is white fragility. And fragility is when a white individual is challenged on ideas about race. White people tend to withdraw, cry, argue, minimize, or otherwise become defensive in an attempt to restore a sense of racial comfort. And so white fragility is then an outcome of systemic factors in our society, such as the segregation that we see, the good and bad binary around racism that we discussed 2 weeks ago, the belief in individualism and meritocracy, also the white racial comfort and sense of belonging that whites have as part of white dominant culture, and then white psychic freedom. If you're not familiar with white psychic freedom, it's just that white individuals do not have to continually question experiences of race or racism, and so white individuals have more energy and psychic freedom to put their energy, emotions, and effort into other areas of their life and or profession, personal or professional. And so Robin DiAngelo does a lot of work. She's a academic lecturer and does a lot of work on white fragility. And this comes from her book, Why It's So Hard to Talk to White People About Racism. And she writes this: we move through a wholly racialized world with an unracialized identity. For example, white people can represent all of humanity. People of color can only represent their racial selves. Challenges to this identity become highly stressful and even intolerable. Not often encountering these challenges, we withdraw, defend, cry, argue, minimize, ignore, and in other ways push back to regain our racial position in equilibrium. I term that pushback white fragility. Right? And so we see white fragility as white individuals try to maintain their comfort in their race. And white fragility is an aspect of privilege and white privilege. And privilege is a right, favor, advantage, immunity, specially granted to one individual or group and withheld from another. And so one of the articles posted is Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, which I really appreciate and I hope you appreciate as well. And she writes this: I have come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. So just to give you a little bit of a preview, if you have not read the article previously or have not read it yet for this week, white privilege is things like being able to select a Band-Aid that matches the color of your skin. It's being able to go and possibly complain to a manager and expect the individual to look like yourself. It is being able to get a loan without question. It is the ability to go into a space and have the belief that everyone will look similarly to you. It is not to have your intelligence questioned, right? There's several privileges, but if you look into Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, you'll find some additional privileges in terms of whiteness. She does have, I don't know if she does, yes she does, has advanced it more, but there are other articles that talk about more intersectionality and intersectional privileges. So this one that is posted, you'll see, is mostly about racial privilege. And so thinking about all of this and white privilege and what it means for us, Jane Elliott wrote, "You are not born racist. You are born into a racist society. And like anything else, if you can learn it, you can unlearn it. But some people choose not to unlearn it because they're afraid they'll lose power if they share with other people. We are afraid of sharing power. That's what it's all about." And so part of white privilege is first recognizing that white individuals have white privilege and have these privileges, and then once recognizing that this privilege exists, right, doing things to move towards the anti-racist identity that we talked about in week 3. So this is just a brief overview. I hope that you enjoy the many readings that there are available in Blackboard. In addition, watching the Colorblind versus Color Brave, that's TED Talk is really great as well. So good luck with all of your readings and your discussion posts as well as your quizzes, and we will be in touch. Have a great week, everyone.